Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the second of two virtual mayoral candidate forum dates hosted by Make Homes Happen. We are so glad to have you all here with us this evening. My name is Elaine Rasmussen, and I'm the CEO of Social Impact Strategies Group, who is a partner of several Make Homes Happen members, and I am the MC and moderator for this evening. A few housekeeping items before we begin. We are using Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. We are recording this webinar and we will share it on the Make Homes Happen Facebook page by the end of the month. Audience members, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type any questions you have for the candidates. They'll be able to answer your questions directly in just a bit. Finally, for candidates who would like to do so, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, and email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with additional questions. As you all know, we have an important election coming up on November 2nd, in less than 2 months. All 13 Minneapolis City Council members and the Minneapolis mayor are up for election this year, as are all park board members and 2 board of estimate and taxation members. To see exactly who will be on the ballot, visit the Secretary of State's website. For information about when, where, and how to vote, visit www.vote.minneapolismn.gov. Louis, who's managing our tech tonight, will share these links in the chat. Additionally, Minneapolis has ranked choice voting elections. This November, you will have the power to rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. If your first choice does not continue in the instant runoff, your vote goes to your second choice. And if your second choice does not continue, your vote goes to your third choice. You should rank as many candidates as you prefer up to 3. When you listen to the candidates tonight, consider not just your first choice, but also your second and third. Before we hear from the candidates, let me tell you a little bit about Make Homes Happen. We are a coalition of community-based organizations and groups that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenants' rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we helped successfully push for a $40 million investment to the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Yet even though the housing needs of our community far outweighed the dollars spent, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what is already a housing crisis, and we know housing is a critical issue for the city. City leaders have a significant influence on the policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. That's why Make Homes Happen is hosting this forum tonight. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with candidates. We approached each candidate, invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing. The interview included 3 questions, and the candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded the candidates' answers and played them back during our forums in lieu of opening statements. None of this evening's candidates completed the video questionnaire, so our candidates tonight will each have 2 minutes to present an opening statement live today. So let's get ready to hear from the candidates. Louis, will you play the recorded Zoom interview for us? We'll start with Jacob Frey in alphabetical order by last name. Mayor Frey, you have 2 minutes to introduce yourself. Introduce yourself. I'll start your time when you begin speaking, and remember to unmute yourself.
Well, thank you, Elaine, for moderating. Thank you to the entire Make Homes Happen coalition for all of your advocacy and work. When I took office, I declared that housing was a right, but we didn't stop there. We worked directly with the coalition right now hosting this particular forum, receiving letters, advocating, and pushing through a budget in our very first year that achieved 3 times the previous record that our city had ever invested before in affordable housing, to the tune of $40 million. We followed it up the second year with another $30 million investment. This was not just more than our city had ever seen before. This was not just more than any city had provided on a per capita basis in our state. This was more than almost any city on a per capita basis in the entire country. And it wasn't just the investment. We've produced about 7 times the previous average of deeply affordable and low-income housing at 30% of the area median income. We started a program called Stable Homes, Stable Schools, which has now successfully housed or prevented from going homeless about 3,000 kids in our Minneapolis public school system. We've produced and helped with more shelters than ever before through some of our most difficult times of COVID-19. And we've provided new models like the Avivo model over on the near north side that gives people the dignity and privacy that they deserve. I will put my record on affordable housing up against any mayor in the entire country. The results speak for themselves. I'm proud to work with this coalition. We've gotten extraordinary things done. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. We have a lot of work left to do, but the results, again, they speak for themselves. We can go even further. There needs to be a regional approach working in conjunction with the county and the state. And going forward, I think that's exactly what we need to get done to secure both record funding as well as ensure that housing does in fact become a.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. And we will now go to Marcus Harcus. Did I get that right, Louis? Marcus, your 2 minutes begins.
Good evening. Thanks for organizing the forum and thanks for including me. My name is Marcus Harcus. I'm from North Minneapolis. I grew up here. I'm raising my children here. I'm a writer and organizer, a nonprofit lobbyist, and a social entrepreneur. Sorry, I'm in a rest stop. But you know, I'm running for mayor because I think that our city needs to do more in terms of addressing the crisis of police, police accountability, of housing justice, of creating opportunities for the people in our city who need it the most. I've personally experienced, the pressures of gentrification, the foreclosure crisis. My mother, when she got divorced, 20 years ago, there was a time when she experienced homelessness in this city. So the issues of affordable housing and helping people find stable homes, it hits home very closely to me. And I applaud all of the organizers, all of the advocates who do great work to fund housing for people, low-income people. But we live in a city now where you see homelessness everywhere. We've seen a lot of tent encampments around the city in the last several years. And it's hard to tell if things are getting better. I once worked with, and I'm sorry I didn't keep good track of the time, but I once worked with a woman who ran the housing studies department at the University of Minnesota. And I asked her, what is the solution to this perpetual, never-ending affordable housing crisis? And the answer was that we need to subsidize housing as much as possible. I mean, if people don't have a stable home, then they're not going to have a stable life. And we're not going to have a lot of safety on the streets. So I would be committed to trying to, and we do need a regional approach, to work with the state and the county and the federal government and the private sector to try to raise as much money as we can to create innovative solutions so that nobody in our city is displaced because they can't afford to live here. A lot.
Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate those comments. We will now move on to Paul Johnson. Don't forget to unmute your mic.
Hi, I'm Paul Johnson, Northside resident, business owner, revolutionary, advocate, and accomplice to all things equitable and social justice. I am tired of the incremental change that has been going on for decades here in Minneapolis, now often referred to as Minnesippi. We are the last place in so many racial disparities. It is heartbreaking. It's an abomination to live here and to not push for exponential change, radical change, revolutionary change is to do a disservice to us all at this point when we have the opportunity to do something different. We have the eyes of the world upon us, and we have candidates who want to do the same old and tell you that we can only do this much. Oh, we're going to do this much. We're going to do this much. No. It's time for a change. It's time we lead with our hearts, our humanity, empathy, and the idea that when we put people first, above all things, our city will flourish. Anytime I have left, I'd like to offer prayers, solace to the water protectors up north for line 3. Please stop line 3. It is a hazard and a danger to us all.
Thank you, Paul Johnson. I appreciate that. And last but certainly not least, Mike Winter.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Elaine, Paul, Jacob, and Marcus for coming out tonight. My name is Mike Winter. I've spent my entire life here in Minneapolis. I attended high school at Roosevelt. I went to college at Brown Institute for Broadcasting. I met my first girlfriend here, and I currently reside in South Minneapolis over in the Morris Park neighborhood. The whole reason I am running for mayor, because I am not a politician. I am a union commercial driver. What got me off the bench and made me decide to take a stab at running for office was the poor condition of my beloved city this past year. I grew up here in the 80s and the 90s, and I lived through Murderapolis. And I'm starting to see that happen again now. In fact, it may be worse. I know that affordable housing is also an issue here, and I would like to help with that as much as I can. I'd like to improve racial disparity and get rid of racial disparities, eliminate redlining, and having equal housing for everyone. I do feel like Frey does have some good programs in place, but I think that we can improve upon them as a city together. I am not a Democrat or Republican. I am an independent, so I cannot be bought by outside interests, and I don't work for a big tent party. I would just be working for the people to improve the city in any way I can, because I don't think enough is being done now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike Winter. I appreciate that. And thank you, candidates, for being here tonight and introducing yourselves to us. We're now ready to move on to the next phase of our event. We will hear directly from candidates in response to audience questions. If you're joining us today, please use the Q&A feature to ask any housing-related questions you have for the candidates. Make Homes Happen has prepared a few questions to get us started. To be fair, we will rotate each candidate's answers first. Candidates, you will each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. We will time you and mute you at 2 minutes. We'll start with Marcus Harcus for our first question. The question is, describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
Could you please repeat the question?
Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
I mean, honestly, I'm not sure what naturally occurring affordable housing means, so it's kind of tough for me to answer the question. But I think that the city needs to invest more into existing housing stock in the lower and moderate income neighborhoods. I think we need to prioritize development of affordable housing as opposed to these high-end apartments and condos that have been proliferating throughout the city. And we just need to subsidize as much housing as possible. I mean, some people like to call that socialism, but I call it being humane and smart. We need to make sure everyone has a home. So we need to invest as much money as possible into truly affordable housing. So prioritize, affordable housing development as opposed to this high-end stuff that's pricing most of us out.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Harcus. I will ask Paul Johnson to respond to the same question. I'll repeat the question. Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
Well, the number one thing is to stop investing our money into people who into affordable housing and rather put the money back into public housing. Every time it goes into affordable housing, it's actually being filtered through a bunch of people who are taking the money and trying to invest it. And I think it's important, and I hope at some point we could take a little second for the people to understand what like AMI is, so that they understand how Minneapolis pertains to that. That could be my whole 2 minutes in trying to explain that to people. So I hope we do take some time to allow people to understand what that is. But in order to keep more of the NOAA housing, we have to keep the outside interests from coming in and speculating our land. They're always wanting to tear down the NOAA, and we have 30,000 units roughly within that, and only 15,000 or less are available for the 60% AMI, which is actually 100% of what Minneapolitans make. Let's be clear on that. So anything at 60% is what we make. It's our general income. And that is not given the racial disparities of the lower income of our Black communities. But so anything that we're not building at 20 and 30% AMI is really pointless to anybody here in Minneapolis. So if we're not doing that and actively putting, instead of $22 million into affordable housing, we took $22 million and actually put it into public housing, or the 400 some lots that Minneapolis owns, you could literally put 60,000 into each of those lots and give away a home to 400 people for the same amount that Jacob just gave to a bunch of people who are going to filter that money through and not really build anything for us that's affordable in Minneapolis anyway.
Thank you, Mr. McCoy. I appreciate your response. And we will now go to Mr. Winter.
Muted. Could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Sure, absolutely. Describe
All
one
right.
of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
I think the obvious answer is to create more housing. I think the city needs to continue to support nonprofit developers so they can come in and flip some of these buildings around and create more housing for people. We also have the 2040 plan, which I am a big proponent of, aside from all the variances that are being let through with buildings that are going up that are over 3 stories. There's also no parking being provided. So I'd like to see that improve, but I'm a pretty big believer in supply and demand. And as long as Minneapolis can supply more houses, it should bring down the demand in my book. But the problem is crime in the city. I'm going to pivot back to that. Right now, nobody wants to move into Minneapolis because of the high crime rate. So once we get the crime rate taken care of, I think people will want to move back into the city. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Frey, finally, I will repeat the question once again. Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
Thank you for the question. I'll describe several of the most effective mechanisms that we're already using, and I will quickly define AMI as well. It stands for the area median income. So if we talk about 30% of the area median income. You take the average of the area median income and you take 30% of that. That is the figure that we're talking about. So as far as the figures that we're talking, first is our 4D program. It's a program that we began and expanded right when I took office. And what it does is it gives up to a 40% property tax break for some of these small scale landlords that are willing to keep at least 20% of their units at or below of 60% of the area median income for a given time. It's working, it's successful, we're keeping people in their homes, and we're preserving naturally occurring affordable housing at the same time. Second, we started a land bank program where we're literally able to purchase units, purchase development and buildings that could otherwise be flipped and go to for-profit, could be gentrified in some way. We're managing to keep them at the naturally occurring affordable level by working with a number of nonprofit developers and owners, by working with a bunch of different organizations that are committed to preventing people from being displaced. We have invested record amounts of money. And by the way, it makes sense to invest record amounts of money specifically in naturally occurring affordable housing because it's several times cheaper to preserve an existing naturally occurring affordable housing unit than it is to produce a new one. The figure that you heard earlier about how you could just dump $60,000 per unit and somehow that would then forever preserve that unit as naturally occurring is wrong. It's false. The way that we have laid it out is by listening to experts, laying out the data, seeing what the evidence tells us, and then going from there. And by the way, there are mayors around the country, cities around the country are following the work that Minneapolis is doing in the area of affordable housing. Does it include subsidy? Absolutely, record amounts of it. But is it limited to subsidy? No. And as Mr. Winter correctly mentioned, the other very important piece of this is making sure that we have an adequate supply of housing to meet the demand in our city. And for years and years, we saw rents that were skyrocketing through the roof because.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. We're going to move on to the next question. This question will start off with Mr. Johnson. What will you do as mayor to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new affordable and accessible housing stock?
Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties here. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. What will you do as mayor to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
Really, it's everybody wonders where money comes from. It's really about how it's spent. It's about who it's spent through, and not allowing it to. I just refer to it go through too many filters. In modern day politics, it seems to be that for every dollar spent, you maybe get 10 cents on the ground. We need to have policies and actions to assure that our money, our tax dollars, the ones that we work so damn hard for, are actually being spent appropriately, and reworking the budget and understanding where our policies lie amongst outside of state land interests, which I just don't believe in at all. Out of state landlords, even out of city landowners. You know, we really need to be crafting policy to get the homes that are in Minneapolis into Minneapolitans' hands. We don't necessarily have a housing crisis. What we do have is a 50% home ownership rate of the whole city. We have a company down in Atlanta, Georgia, that owns like 270 properties in North Minneapolis alone. I mean, we're selling our land and allowing out-of-state people to pay their income taxes in their state. This is like a double negative. We should have this property to the people's hands at affordable rates with county co-signers, because this is how we get that first step to equitable home ownership and getting rid of the racial disparities that are 3 times like Black home ownership and white home ownership. 75% of Minneapolitans white own their home. Only 25% of Black families own their home. These are not like small numbers. If we don't start bridging that gap, like not incrementally, not tiny little bits, just actually fixing the gap, not.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Now, Mr. Winter, I'll repeat the question. What will you do as mayor to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
Well, as mayor, you need to keep a balanced budget. I'm a firm believer in that, and we don't need to go out and raise the property taxes to pay for affordable housing. I feel like the city is doing a good job providing affordable housing. What the city is thinking about doing that would be a horrible decision is introducing some kind of rent control. I think rent control will devastate the market. I think it'll discourage developers from coming in and building new buildings. There will be people that already own existing apartment buildings that will want to unload them to big corporations because they're not bringing in the rent that they used to, and then they can't afford to maintain their buildings. So as mayor, I would fight very hard against any kind of rent control. I would like to see the 50% home ownership rate come up, most definitely. Maybe we could include buying apartments or condos into that mix. I see the city heading towards less single family homes and more 3 to 4 story apartment buildings. I think maybe in the future, we could include some of those units. Maybe they could be bought. And I would continue to keep an eye on redlining. That's it.
Thank you. Now on to Mayor Frey. What will you do as re-elected mayor to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
So in order to have affordable housing in every neighborhood, which is something that I campaigned on in 2017 and something that I stand by as mayor, you first need to allow for affordable housing in every neighborhood. And when I took office in 2017, there were huge swaths of the city that by and large, you could not live in unless you could build a really big home on a really big parcel. We changed that. We were one of the first cities in the entire country to say, look, in addition to being able to build a really gigantic home, you can also build something more affordable. Now, is that more affordable duplex or triplex affordable at 60% or 30% of area median income? No, not at all, not necessarily, but it would be more affordable than that gigantic mansion would be. It gives people a diversity of housing options in every neighborhood. And yes, absolutely, I stand by those decisions. Now, on top of that, you need to make sure that you've got partnerships and you're working directly with the state and with the federal government. And I'll give you one great example. We received American Rescue dollars, and around $28 million of the initial $100 million outlay went directly to affordable housing and people that were experiencing severe housing instability or homelessness. Having those partnerships enables the city to go beyond simply use of property taxes. Property taxes are a regressive tax. You know, all of us can talk about, well, we can't do these little changes, we need to do gigantic changes. But here's the thing, at the city level, by and large, you are reliant on property taxes, which disproportionately impact low-income people and seniors. This has got to be about more than just catchphrases, saying you're going to bring people together and saying you need a huge transformational shift. I think you have to be able to explain exactly what you're going to do and how you're going to get there. We've laid out a very clear.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. And I believe it's now time for Mr. Harcus. What will you do as mayor to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock? Mr. Harcus, are you mute?
I'm sorry, I was talking with the phone muted.
That's okay.
Excuse me. So as mayor of Minneapolis, I'd be devoted to seeking out and consulting with the most progressive housing experts, housing policy experts, and nonprofit development experts in the region and beyond. And work, it has to be a cross-sectoral partnership in order to generate the level of funding needed to invest in affordable housing. So I make sure that I, along with the government affairs of the city, lobby the state and the county and seek funding on the federal level from the philanthropic sector to make sure that we can continue to grow the affordable housing funds for our city. So I, as the mayor alone, am not going to come up with silver bullet solutions, and the city alone cannot solve what essentially is a regional crisis of affordable housing. It's not limited to our city. People come in and out of our city all the time. And so most importantly, I think we need to consult with the people who are affected by these issues. A lot of times the government will have all these privileged people in the room, you know, meeting for years to discuss how to end homelessness, but they don't have experience with it. So we need to consult with the people who are affected by these issues so that we can produce solutions that are informed by people that actually experience, you know, unaffordable housing and homelessness. So I'd engage the communities.
Thank you, Mr. Harcus. We do have a question from the audience, and I will start with Mr. Winter this time with this question. Where do the people go when you clear the homeless encampments? So I'll read that again. Where do people go when an order comes to clear homeless people from encampments?
I'm not sure
I
where
will
they
start
go.
with.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
am I on? Okay.
Go ahead. You can go.
Are you asking where would I send them, or where do I think they're going? I don't understand the question, I guess.
So if I'm going to interpret the question for the audience member, we've had, as a result of pandemic, people having to, once they're evicted, living in encampments. And we've also seen orders that have come through that folks have to be cleared from those encampments. I believe the question is saying, where do they go?
Well, right
What's
now,
your plan?
Because of COVID and the crime wave that's going on in Minneapolis, our downtown is only at 34% occupancy. And I can't remember the last time we've had a convention in the convention center. So if I was mayor, I would take those people and I would put them in the convention center and cancel any events that were going on, or I would move them into open housing in downtown Minneapolis or open offices that aren't being occupied by businesses. And I don't think a lot of those businesses will be returning anytime soon. They all like to say that it's because of COVID, but I think it's mostly because of the crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mayor Frey.
Thank you for the question. The answer is it depends. It depends which jurisdiction the homeless encampment was located on. Occasionally it's park board, occasionally it's state, occasionally it's county, sometimes it's city. It also depends on what assets are available at the time. First, we have produced 2 new shelters just in the last year or so. One is culturally specific and sensitive to our American Indian community called Homeward Bound. The second is the new and improved Vivo model, which is in near North Minneapolis, that gives people the dignity that they deserve by providing them with their own individual tiny home within a larger warehouse where they can just be themselves. They can close the door, they can get a sense of privacy, they can rejuvenate for the next day. And that sense of stability is so essential for taking the next step. Sometimes we've had room and board options available as well for people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. There are other instances when we've had referrals. And then there are quite a few instances as well where we've been able to provide people hotel rooms, which enable us to transition people from hotel rooms ultimately to homes. And that's led to a really important transition in our policy in how we use single room occupancy, which would enable us to have larger scale hotels at times used for people to have longer term and low barrier homes that would allow us to provide that transition, again, from people experiencing homelessness to someone who is ultimately in a long-term and stable housing format. So I guess there's a number of different areas. And I'll note that, we're, given that we provide so much, we provide a wide swath of social service in Minneapolis, far more than any city in the entire state. People also come to Minneapolis to receive that service. And that's why it's so essential that we need that regional approach. It needs to be a statewide effort so that we're all working collectively to make sure that, yes, people do have a stable home that they can call their own.
Thank you. Mr. Harcus, same question. What would you do, or where do the people who are cleared from homeless encampments go?
Well, I think we have to find out who these people are and not just treat them as, silhouettes that we want to push, further into the shadows, out of sight. Because the majority of people who are homeless are not actually sleeping outside. And a lot of the people who are in these tent encampments are people who are suffering from long-term, persistent mental illness and or like serious substance abuse, drug addiction. And, trauma is the gateway drug. So we need to find out what these people as individual human beings need in order to become healthy enough to maintain housing. We can't just warehouse them. We can't, put them in concentration camps. We can't, arrest homelessness away. We have to consult with people that actually have experience working with these communities and to try to find individual solutions for them. Because if it's mental illness and drug addiction that is really, leading them out into the streets like this, putting them inside of a room is not going to solve those problems. So we need to find the people, the social workers, the treatment experts, that people who have worked on finding homes for shelterless people to figure out some sustainable solutions. We can't just warehouse people and push them further into the shadows, because once you clear these encampments, they're just finding somewhere else to sleep outside. And that's not a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Harcus. And last but not least, Mr. Johnson, would you like me to repeat the question?
No. The encampments have been a point of advocacy for me. Last year, building myself 10 8x10 platforms to get tents up off the ground when fall came. And let's be clear, this is what was being shot at homeless encampments last year. This is what was being done with their property. These are the police that Jacob Frey is in charge of pepper spraying homeless people. Okay, the notice of eviction is coming out right now. Here's one for this October 5th. Notice to vacate. There's numbers at the bottom that say they're there for help, but when you call those numbers, everywhere is booked and packed. So do we have any reasonable, even possibility of solutions? Of course. Let's give people some permanent warehousing opportunities for their things, okay? Instead of bulldozing them, we could offer some space. It's one of the main things that when people are in the day, in and out day-to-day night system, having to be in by 4 and out by 6 a.m., they have to take all their stuff. How do you get a job when you have to take everything that you own with you? How do you ever prepare yourself for the world when you don't have an opportunity to pause, put your things down, get situated, maybe have a PO box or any of the first steps that it could ever take? besides what Mr. Harcus is clearly, we have a social service and mental health issue, as well as the opioid pandemic. You know, this all leads to land back, which we could be giving back to the indigenous with funds of building their own centers to help their unhoused situation. I mean, there are so many opportunities to take the large amount of money that Jacob Frey is talking about, that he has all in front of him, that he's able to spit out whatever, you know, numbers that he wants in a budget, and we allocate the money appropriately for people, not for property, not for profit, but for people. And we start taking care of ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So I think we get to start with Mayor Frey on this next question. As the mayor, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
So thank you for the question. When I took office, we brought together a panel of experts, of people with lived experience, of individuals that were committed to advocating for additional affordable housing, housing options, home ownership opportunities, and they came forward with 4 overarching key areas. The first was additional production of affordable housing. The second was retention of naturally occurring affordable housing. The third was tenants' rights. And yes, the fourth was home ownership opportunities, specifically for communities that have traditionally been left out. And yes, for generations now, our Black and brown communities have been intentionally excluded, whether that's through Jim Crow or following World War II and the GI Bill that was largely only accessible to white communities. Black communities were largely redlined. We want to make sure that the precisions now of our solutions match the precision of the harm that was initially inflicted. And I got to tell you, it's not enough just to spout off a catchphrase saying that we need to do more. You got to be able to provide specifics about what exactly you're going to be able to do. Otherwise, no, you're never going to ultimately help anybody. And so what we have provided is dramatically expanded home ownership opportunities through a combination of Green Homes North, transitioning some of the 300 plus city-owned and vacant properties that were on the north side, for instance, to home ownership opportunities, providing subsidy to bridge the gap between whatever was the market rates to the affordable rate, and even working to provide down payment assistance, because oftentimes people can pay the mortgage on a monthly basis, but they can't put down $30,000 up front to pay a down payment. So again, specificity is hugely important. And it's important that we go even further than we have before. For instance, working with the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, other entities that will further help us not just produce homeowner opportunities, but could create them well into the future.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. Mr. Harcus, I'll repeat the question. Make sure I got it. As the mayor, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
I think it's important to begin with the people of color, the low-income households who are already in homes, but who may be struggling to maintain them, and to see what resources they need. The city can play a better role of partnering with organizations that specialize in helping to prepare people for home ownership, you know, first-time home buyers. But I think the main thing a lot of people need is they need help to become credit worthy so that they can get financing, they can get a mortgage, and people need help with that down payment assistance. I know people can, they can get the FHA loans, you know, if they're first-time home buyers, to get the down payment assistance. But sometimes people have had homes before and maybe they've lost them and they need to get, I mean, home ownership is often way more affordable than rental housing. So the more we can create homes on these vacant lots or in these vacant homes by helping to redevelop the existing housing stock that may be, you know, kind of dilapidated, the more opportunities we can create to, you know, close the racial disparity in home ownership. So that's mainly helping people become credit worthy, repair their credit, and get down payment assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Harcus. Moving on to Mr. Johnson. What would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
Absolutely. There are wonderful programs that have been instituted down with Bank of America, really helping move forward BIPOC home ownership. We do need to start using different models for who qualifies for homes, and we really need to be working with either policymakers, legislators, and banks on getting an idea of having a rental history being your cosigner, or being to some degree a down payment. Even if you've been able to afford a rent that would be hundreds of more dollars than your monthly home payment, these are the items that have to start being specifically looked at within our society as a whole, not just in Minneapolis. Organizing microloans and saving circles within neighborhood associations has always been culturally very, very effective because of trust issues within our BIPOC communities. Because of redlining, because of racial covenants, because of what we've done historically, the mistrust is there. And speaking of those things, we directly need to acknowledge the damage that we did historically to what we had our own Black Wall Streets here in the Rondo and North Minneapolis neighborhoods. And we need to make direct reparations to whoever we can that was directly involved as we tore apart those neighborhoods and those families and those businesses. We need to start making direct amendments for that and start replacing what we directly stole from those folks.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And next is Mr. Winter. What would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
I think the city already provides a lot of help to first-time home buyers. In order to move them forward, they need a little bit of help, but not that much. I think people are so used to getting so much help from the DFL that they've become dependent on it. And I think it's no good for the city. If you really want to help people, Marcus touched on this. How about if the city gave you free financial advice to clean up your credit? And then once you completed that program, then the city would help with a down payment or show you where you could go to get help with a down payment. If you really want to help first-time homeowners here in the city, why don't we start by cleaning up the crime? Let's start by putting the police department back together. And instead of saying that we can have 100 to 200 cops and a bunch of social workers and mental health experts, the city needs its police department back to make it safe so that people would even want to bother living here. If we don't get a handle on this, Minneapolis will become the next Detroit within 10 years. Minneapolis needs its police to create safe neighborhoods that people want to live in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. We will move on to the next question. Louis, do we have any other questions from the audience?
Not right now.
Thank you. My next question, and we will start with Mr. Harcus. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how? If not, why not?
So the question is if the city can improve its regulatory oversight of rental housing?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, of course, definitely. I mean, I know it's a capacity question with, thousands of units, but I think that, I'm not sure what the inspection process is, but the city should make sure that if landlords are providing safe, habitable housing for people, there are a lot of apartments in this city that would take your breath away if you saw the conditions that a lot of people are forced to live in. And a lot of times, you know, these slumlords, they're targeting people who may have unlawful detainers or felonies or just low income, so they're out of options. But that subjects people to, I'd say, borderline inhumane conditions. So I think the city should focus primarily on, you know, older housing stock and the rental housing that targets low income people, because this is usually where we find the most problems in terms of, you know, just deplorable conditions. So I'm not sure how to quantify what kind of capacity levels the city needs for that, but I think that's where the city's focus should be in terms of regulating rental housing. Focus on the most vulnerable communities in the city to ensure that they're living in safe, habitable housing.
Thank you, Mr. Harcus. Same question to Mr. Johnson. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how, or not?
Yeah, I think, you know, now is the time that we're focusing a lot on community building. There's no reason why in a city of Minneapolis that has so many beautiful communities that gets together, that have like, you know, homeowners associations and things, or HNAs and whatnot, that to have more of the services be involved in that. You know, we all want our neighborhoods to be nice, and we don't want anybody next door to us living in some sort of, you know, like Marcus said, deplorable conditions. You know, it's uneasing to know how many people are suffering out there, and that we're not doing what we can to make that stop. You know, $150,000 for legal assistance for people who are in, like, who feel that they don't have anywhere to go with their landlords. They don't have, like Marcus said, maybe they're felonies, or maybe they're immigrants, or maybe whatever, and they don't feel like they have legal recourse. The city has only dedicated like pennies for these legal funds for them to actually approach and have any steps towards protection. You know, we need to put more first step programs in the hands of our lower income folks. We offer things, but we don't offer the paths to get there. They're almost dangled slightly above us, where yes, there's grants, but we can't afford grant writers like the little bit more higher income people can, so they end up getting the grants. We need people to help people get into those first steps, and that's how we make sure not only housing stays affordable, but also we really need to make it accessible for our disabled folks as well within the affordable housing industry. Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next, Mr. Winter. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and why not? Or if not, why not?
First of all, I think the Community Planning and Economic Development Department of the city needs to be a lot tougher on landlords. If they want to charge a premium price for these units, then they better have a premium place to stay. And that goes for, you know, any landlord. The city needs to be a lot tougher on landlords if they're going to charge what they charge. I am not for any kind of rent control. There's no estimates on the price tag of this rent control department. The city is going to lose tax revenue as a result of this. And who will be enforcing this? Who's going to go around building to building and building to make sure that landlords are charging the right rent? We're going to have to hire more people for that, and that's going to cost the city more money. I believe that rental assistance is a better option. If the city can help out with the rent in the form of assistance, that would be a lot better than any kind of rent control. I don't think the city council needs that kind of power. I don't think the mayor should have that kind of power. I believe in free enterprise. So any kind of rent control would be devastating to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. And we will round it out with Mayor Frey. Same question. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how, or not?
First, we should all acknowledge that there's always room for improvement, and we should be striving towards that every single day. And at the same time, we have entirely overhauled the way our city enforces and regulates property. Under Director Kim Keller and now under Frey, our new director, we have taken extraordinary efforts to shift it so that rather than enforcing against a building, we are working to help people that are living in that building. It's an entire shift that our city has gone through for the first time over these last several years. Second, we started a program called More Representation Minneapolis. Working with attorneys throughout our city, we managed to dramatically increase the number of hours that were provided to tenants facing eviction. We know that a tenant facing eviction that has an attorney is far more likely to be able to stay in their home. Additionally, we've stepped up the opportunity to actually purchase some of these buildings, especially in instances where a landlord license has been revoked. So rather a revocation of a license leading to a purchase of a property, leading to granite countertops, leading to increases in rent, and then people getting displaced, we've literally found ways to purchase the buildings, keep them affordable, retain the tenants, and prevent the kind of displacement that has harmed so many for so long. Again, a lot of people can talk about the easy fixes. They can lay out the problem with zero solutions, which I've heard repeatedly. But this is what we've actually done to help people. These issues are complex, they're hard, and we've been working every single day with our nose to the grindstone with the goal of quite simply helping people and tenants throughout our city.
Thank you, Mayor Frey. And in the interest of fairness, Mayor Frey does have to leave us pretty much at the top of the hour, which is now. So what I would like to do is afford him the 2 minutes for his closing statements, and we'll continue with the Q&A upon his departure. Mayor Frey, if you would like to make your closing 2-minute comments.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear at this forum today. Thank you to the other candidates that have joined us, and I really appreciate also the opportunity to provide closing statements prior to the end of the forum itself. My name is Jacob Frey. I'm the mayor of Minneapolis, and through 2 years of unprecedented progress, and then the last 2 years of, yes, unprecedented challenge, I've told the truth. We've took principled positions, and we've charted a clear, honest, and progressive path forward for the city of Minneapolis. There's a lot of people out there that'll tell you that there is a magic wand fix for the problems that we're facing. There isn't. There's a lot of people that'll tell you that if you simply recite a hashtag or sign on to some catchphrase, all of the issues that we're experiencing will suddenly be gone. I won't just tell you about the problems that we're facing, about the institutionalized racism that has plagued our city and our nation for so long. I'll tell you about a path forward to not just move us out of this predicament, but move us beyond the old normal and towards true transformation in our city. Again, say what you want about me. I don't cave. I don't take the easy way out. And we have been providing an honest path forward for our city, and will continue to do so regardless of the consequences or who seems to be yelling at you in that particular moment. I appreciate the time. And I also want to just mention, I appreciate the partnership that we have had. You know, from the very beginning stages of my term, we have partnered directly with housing advocacy organizations like you to set records in the areas of affordable housing. Literally set records. We need to make sure that that work continues and that it's adopted not just in the city of Minneapolis, but statewide. Thank you so much for the time, and I appreciate the opportunity to close.
Thank you, Mayor Frey, and have a great evening.
Too.
We'll continue with the conversation with the rest of the panelists. I will tee up the next question. We'll start with Mr. Johnson. Describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience to build constructive working relationships with city staff, elected leaders, and community members, as the mayor?
Anecdotally, I don't think there's any more better way to describe that than having been a chef for 20 years and working with the front end and the crazy cast of characters that you always work with in the back. I'll tell you, leadership is about being able to bring folks together no matter what the opinion, by finding the root sources of where we can agree and disagree and then hashing those out. And sometimes it's also standing in the face of absolute adversity, knowing what's right because you're uplifting the voices that can't be heard. And that is also part of building those relationships, is letting people know how and where you stand, and the ability to see them in their life, know that that's not your human experience, that's theirs, appreciating that, taking in, listening, observing, allowing whatever to really like take place between you and another human being is really the most genuine way you can start to build a foundation of like-minded individuals to really prosper in this city. Myself and other candidate Jarrell Perry are actually building a coalition of like-minded people. We are almost co-campaigning ourselves and for each other because we see such a love for our community, and we just want to push forward and build and mend those relationships, heal Minneapolis, and grow together.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Same question to Mr. Winter. Describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience to build constructive working relationships with city staff, elected leaders, and community members as mayor?
I will draw from my experience as a Teamster union steward. The job of a good steward is to work with management and labor to come to a good solution that benefits both parties. What we've seen from Jacob Frey and the rest of the DFL running this town for really the past 40 years is nothing but chaos. Mayor Frey is not able to stick to one thing. He hops all around. One minute he's for the police, the next minute he's not for the police. What Minneapolis needs
Let's focus our comments on what your response is.
Oh, okay, I will. The city needs a bipartisan leader with a backbone. I'm not DFL, I'm not a Republican. I am bipartisan. I'm in the middle, and I'm ready to listen to everyone's opinions on how we can better our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. Mr. Harcus, same question. Describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience to build constructive working relationships with city staff, elected leaders, and community members as mayor?
So I've been a professional community organizer and advocate since 2003. And I've had a wide variety of jobs as an organizer. I've managed the community visioning project in Northeast Minneapolis, which we had to deal with everything from the residents to the business owners to all the levels of government, from city to federal to, the nonprofit sector and businesses and even faith institutions. I've worked as a coalition organizer, to try to move the Minnesota Department of Transportation to increase, their commitment and the outcomes to equitable contracting and hiring, 70-member coalition. I've worked on a wide variety of policy issues, housing policy. It's been a while. Education policy, drug policy reform. So I'm used to working with people from different sectors. I'm used to working in a nonpartisan fashion, and I would transfer that experience, those skills in the mayor's office to not just being a cheerleader for the city, but being an organizer of the city and focusing on finding people who are affected by issues to play leading roles in advocating for the solutions. I'm not one to admire problems or to pretend like I'm a messiah, and that I can single-handedly solve all of these complex social problems, economic problems. So I'm the organizer. I'm the guy who likes to help develop leadership in the people who are affected by issues so that they can play a role in, saving themselves and not trying to pretend like I'm a messianic politician, which a lot of our favorite politicians do. So yeah,
Thank
the
you.
organizing background.
Thank you, Mr. Harcus. I appreciate that. Next question. Louis, do we have any questions that have come up from the audience?
Not right now.
Okay. Next question, we will start with Mr. Johnson. Wait, I think we started with Mr. Johnson last time, correct?
Yep,
Okay,
that's correct.
thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Winter, we will start with you. What is your position on a tenant opportunity to purchase policy, TOPA, for Minneapolis? Based on your position, what impact do you think it will have on residents who live in rental properties? I think you're on mute, sir.
I'm all for TOPA. I'm all for people owning their own homes or apartments or condos or anything. And that I don't think they need that much help from the city government or the DFL to do that. I think people just need to be helped up a little bit and shown the way, and they can do it themselves. So yes, I would be a big supporter of that.
And what impact do you think will have on residents who live in rental properties?
I think an opportunity to own your own place, if I'm understanding the question right, would be an excellent opportunity, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Thank you. Mr. Harcus, same question. What is your position on the tenant opportunity to purchase policy for Minneapolis, TOPA? And based on your position, what impact do you think it will have on residents who live in rental properties?
I admit that I'm not familiar with this program, but the concept of helping tenants to own their homes, I think it's a great idea. I mean, it provides for housing stability, which is especially critical for people with children or older people, who are retired. But I think that we have to set people up for success. So when I became a home buyer, years ago, I went through a first-time home buyer course, and I was really provided with a lot of good education that helped me to be a successful homeowner. So we have to set people up for success. And if tenant options or opportunity to purchase could include like cooperative housing, I mean, I think we need to pay closer attention to a lot of the inequities and injustices that occur with these so-called common interest communities, because a lot of times there's a lot of abuses that are done, and there's a lot of discrimination that occurs. So I think the city does have a role in ensuring that people who may have these opportunities are set up for success and protected by any predatory neighbors, because that's a problem I never hear about, but a lot of people suffer from it.
Thank you, Mr. Harcus. And Mr. Johnson, do you need me to repeat the question?
Oh, I absolutely love TOPA. What an opportunity to get the hands of the person who's been paying in for so long to a building, to get that to finally feel equitable there. I think we need to, and I don't know the exact fine print of it, I will be honest, but if it's not already part of it, we need to make sure that if they've been paying their rent, and that those sorts of things are supersede maybe their credit score, or those things that are purely made up items that really have just been a way to, criminalize or just downtrodden more poverty, which especially affects our BIPOC and communities, our people of color. And how it affects that with a 50% home ownership rate, and we wonder why we've maybe lost a step in city pride. We have got to boost that up. Owning property is one of the most beautiful, prideful things we can do, not to mention the generational wealth that it affords and all the other opportunities that it affords an individual. So 100% what it does is it builds us up. Together we rise, one hand up going, one hand down, pulling the next guy up. That's what we need to do. First steps always to get people into the programs, to make sure that people are aware of it so that they understand the information, and then it is explained to them in a way that everybody can really understand it.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And it looks like we are closely approaching the end of our questions. So I want to remind the audience that you can put your questions in the Q&A section. We will be sunsetting here soon. It's about 1/4 the hour. We are scheduled to go till 8:30, but seeing that I don't really have any questions, I think I'm going to begin the process of having all of our candidates give their 2-minute closing, and then I will wrap us up unless I get another question in the Q&A section. So why don't we start with Mr. Harcus? You will have 2 minutes to give your final closing remarks. Let us know whatever you'd like us to know in 2 minutes.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Marcus Harcus. I'm from Minneapolis. This is my hometown. I grew up in North Minneapolis. I intentionally decided to raise my own kids there. I've survived, worst crime and violence in this city. I've survived excessive racial profiling and police brutality. I've survived gentrification. I've survived a lot of madness in this city. And, I'm still standing. I come to this race as someone, a lot of people run for public office because they want to be that public figure. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm running because I think that we typically lack elected officials who are more that prioritize people over the power that they gain from these positions. I'm trying to demonstrate the kind of political leadership that I believe our city needs in order to serve the most vulnerable members in the community. I mean, I respect everyone's life, but if we want to talk about a sustainable city and safety and opportunity, it has to be we have to prioritize the people who need it the most vulnerable members of our community. So I'm someone who thinks big, I act courageously, and my whole life has been about doing justice, So I come from an organizing and advocacy background, and so I've been involved in politics for the past 20+ years. And I'm not going to try to pretend like I'm a messiah or I'm going to solve all the solutions. I'm going to organize the people who can come up with the solutions and organize the partnerships so that we can solve problems, not just admire them or, celebrate the most marginal change that maintains the status quo. So,
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Harcus. We will now go to Mr. Johnson for your closing 2-minute statement.
Oh, all right. I'm already unmuted. Jacob Frey wants to scare you about his idea of candidates only being hashtag candidates or whatever. Understand that this is his job. This is his job to know those numbers. It's his job to understand what's coming in and what's going out. If I had access to that, I would have a much more precise plan that him and his whole group of people have come up with. For me, I work 50, 60 hours a week, and I come here to represent you, the community of Minneapolis. You know, my friend Travis Jordan was murdered on my front lawn, and I've been boots on the ground ever since, trying to be with the people, organizing and making sure that those voices are heard and uplifted. I am endorsed by Tashira Garraway, the founder of Family Supporting Families Against Police Violence. And my party line is Equity in Motion. So after decades, it's an easy thing to blame Frey, but it's decades of failed leadership that we've put in charge. Leadership that looks really good on paper. They look really good. But when you turn it, there's not much there to substantiate anything. It's time for better. It's time for new. It's time for the opportunity of the change that we opened the door. We kicked that door in. We took to the streets and we got some justice. But Minneapolis, we're on a roll. We can do better. You need to put Paul Johnson as your #1 choice. Jarrell Perry, a 1B or 2 as it were. We're forming a coalition. We're going to get things done. Don't rank Frey, #3.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. And rounding us out, Mr. Winter, for your final 2-minute comments.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you for having me tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight and listening to us debate and go back and forth. I'm Mike Winter, and I want to move Minneapolis forward out of the doldrums that it's in now. What got me off the bench, like I said at the beginning of this episode or this show, was I got to sit at home and watch Lake Street burn. And nothing was done about it for days. I hold Jacob Frey responsible, and I hold our governor responsible for that. That's what it took for a regular blue-collar citizen like me to get off the bench and get into the game to try to affect change in our city. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I'm an independent. All I want to do is help the people of Minneapolis, and I only want to serve 1 term. I do not want to be a career politician either. I would like to reform and restore the Minneapolis Police Department to make sure our streets are safe again. I would also like to include some social workers and mental health experts to ride along with our officers to de-escalate situations. I also want to continue with demilitarizing our police department. I want to revitalize our business community that's taken a giant hit from COVID and the continuing crime that has turned Minneapolis back into Murderapolis like back in the 90s. I have talked to lots of business owners in town, and what they all want is the streets to be under control again. And that's what I would like to bring to them. Last of all, I would like to renew the quality of life here in town. I would like to clean up our parks. I would like to do something about the constant flooding of Lake Nokomis and Lake Hiawatha through architecture. If you head to my website, mikeforminneapolis.com, I have a detailed plan on there that will help with the flooding in around those lakes. Thank you very much for listening. Vote Mike Winter in November.
Thank you, candidates, for participating in our event today. It is important that voters hear from you directly about the issues that matter, and we are extremely grateful for your time and willingness to talk about affordable housing in our city. Thanks to those of you who joined us this evening. If you have any other questions related to affordable housing, you can contact candidates through the information that they shared earlier this evening. Be sure to follow Make Homes Happen on Facebook, as we will share a recording of this forum on our page. Louis is going to share the link to our Facebook page in the chat. Thanks so much again. Have a wonderful and safe evening, everyone.